What's up, artists? Welcome back to the studio. Today we'll begin our first group art project, or our first art project where there are going to be a couple different solutions. The first solution is going to exist primarily in your sketchbook. The next solution will be communally kind of worked through. Each one of you guys is going to come together in the sort of circle studio space built at school, and you're going to share some of your thoughts, some of your research, some of your questions, and you'll come up with an answer to this art project as a group. It'll be an answer you come together around conceptually, but also in terms of what gets fabricated in the studio. And then after that, you'll separate again and come up with some more individual kind of answers to the solution. So let's actually break that down and just talk about the basics of our project, right? I gave you guys two sort of constraints or two entry points to the project. One, make a shelter, and two, make it beautiful. Now I know that you guys, you're familiar enough with the way that I run things in the studio, and you're familiar with the way that I kind of think through projects with you guys, that you know that I'm not necessarily looking for one thing, and honestly I'm probably using language deliberately in a way that's open-ended, leaving space for you guys to think in big, wild, creative ways about what that means to make a shelter. That said, I will actually ask for specific things, specific drawings, specific references. I want you to think about it in ways that address the very pressing issues that we're all experiencing right now. I want you to consider this not merely a problem of pragmatics, but of sort of social and emotional spaces. As a cultural dilemma, how do you think about shelter within the context of your life and with the context of the life of your community? But also I want you to consider beauty within the same constructs, right? What does it mean to make this project beautiful? I'm going to share with you guys kind of ways in which we will engage that. I'm not going to lead you down a particular path there, but I am going to kind of help create the context for those conversations. I am going to kind of try to enforce certain structures within our studio time together so that voices are heard and so that ideas can come to the table and be treated fairly. I'm also going to share with you a fabrication method. We're going to use something really basic and cheap, like low strength, low cost paper. I'm going to help you guys understand how to roll out the paper into really dense rods. And we'll go through not just the kind of process of learning this new technique, but the kind of exercise of the kind of fabrication of this thing, and how there's a bit of mindless labor involved, right? The kind of roll, tear tape, roll. There will be skills that you pick up in this project that are not only conceptual and social, but actual kind of like tangible studio techniques. And once you guys get yourselves sort of a good collection of these sticks, you'll have the ability to kind of think through what it is you can do with them that meet the needs of your conceptual framework. I will kind of walk you down a pathway here to kind of help kickstart some of your ideas. If these are helpful for you, that's awesome. Use them. If they're not helpful for you, or if you would like to use them in sort of a divergent way, that's cool too. If there's one thing that we'll learn as a group this semester is that I'm generally going to step out of the role as a teacher who will guide you specifically to an end and grade you based on how you guys meet my expectations, versus I'm going to work alongside you as an artist and a thinker to teach you the value of artistic thought, because what makes you an artist is not merely your ability to do things, but your ability to think expansively about problems and about processes and about materials. And what you'll need to do is tear out something roughly square shaped, and you can tear or cut them. And we'll start at the corner of that piece of paper and roll the corners as tightly as possible. I recommend doing that on a nice flat surface. And as you get the corner rolled up nice and tightly, as long as you kind of follow through and roll that rod up really nice and tight, you'll end up with a rod that's more or less solid in the middle, and then somewhere out toward the ends starts to thin out and get a little bit weak. Now, as you guys are working as a group, you very likely will get a wide variety of quality and even size of these sticks. But once you kind of start to bring all of your production more or less in line, you should be producing sticks that are more or less the same length, that are more or less the same strength. And I want you to kind of feel out toward the ends of those rods, and eventually you'll start to feel a weak spot in the ends. And I want you to mark those weak spots with a little tick. And the little tick marks will allow you to sort of get a sense for on average, how much strength do you have in your rods. For these ones that I'm making my overall rod length, I'm just going to take a tape measure here and kind of figure this out, roughly 33 inches. I bet if I measured all 8 of the rods that I worked out, all 6, I'm probably not going to get 33 inches of full strength. But if I measure from my 2 tick marks, where the kind of strength spots are, I'm about 24 inches or 26 inches or so of what I'll call the kind of strongest part of these rods. And these are, you could think of them as maybe like a structural component. If making a shelter is essentially an architectural problem, then I'm going to want some sort of architectural building block to fabricate out some sort of design solution. A stick is an architectural building block that if I add a number of them together, I'll have an overall form. If I can maybe come up with a motif or a basic form that becomes kind of one tier above the stick, so if I can come up with a 3-dimensional form that then becomes another building block, then I've taken one step towards building something larger. Let me demonstrate. If I've got 26 inches or so of strength, I need roughly a 24 or a 26 inch sort of template that I can bend each one of my sticks over. This is something in the studio that you could cut down a piece of wood that's to your sort of master measurement. I just happen to have a 24-inch level close by that has a nice sharp edge at either end, and so what I'll do is I'll lay that level out onto my workbench and sort of find the soft spots toward either end and then flex the ends of each one of these rods down. So now each one of my sticks has been reduced to a consistent measurement. 24 inches, 24 inches, 24 inches, 24 inches. A 24-inch stick becomes the basic kind of building block of an architectural motif. A repeated form over and over and over again gives me a sort of, think back to when you were a kid, right? And you would assemble building blocks one on top of the next, on top of the next. It gives me a way to construct something larger. It also gives me a language with which to engage other people. If I have a certain specific kind of unifying principle, it allows me to communicate that to my other collaborators, right? Hey, let's all make 24-inch sticks. That gives us a very specific job to do, and if we have a specific job to do with our hands, our minds might be freed up in a way to have more important conversations about the role of shelter, for example. So these little ends also kind of give me a really important point of contact or fabrication method. This is going to address sort of the problem of craft. As we look forward into this project, I want it to have a certain level of quality to its craftsmanship. Say we're constructing a shelter that needs to withstand sort of environmental stresses. A shelter needs to be strong, right? Okay, so what does a strong shelter look like architecturally? Well, it shouldn't blow over or knock over. It should be freestanding. It should be structurally sufficient to withstand basic stressors. So what can I do with just paper, right, which is just really weak material? What can I do with this paper in order to bring strength to it? The only joinery that I'm allowing you guys to work with right now are these sort of strips of masking tape. And masking tape has a lot of uses, but in terms of like sticking one material to another, it's fairly low tack stuff. There's not a lot of adhesive here. It sticks to itself fairly well, but it won't hold your whole structure together, so kind of keep that in mind. What I'm going to do is begin with a triangular, or in this case, the three-dimensional version of a triangle would be a prism or a pyramid form. I'm going to start with a triangular kind of coordinate here and stand up 3 of these end pieces and use a piece of tape to wrap around them. And this is going to give me a corner joint to what will eventually be a pyramid-like form. And for that, I'll use a couple of strips of this tape. And use one of these pre-torn pieces of tape to carefully join this seam. So like I said before, the tape itself doesn't stick really well to the paper, but it does stick to itself reasonably well. So if this becomes the corner of one of my three-dimensional forms, I have a flexible joint based on the kind of flex of the paper. I have a reasonably strong kind of combination of these 3 tubes here, and as I bring this up, I can start to kind of imagine where some of my other design components will come into play. And this is where having a nice big studio comes in handy, because this starts to stretch out just a little bit here. And each one of those will have the exact same type of taped together fabrication. So you can start now to get the sense for where I'm heading with my with my basic sort of architectural building block. The basic architectural building block that I'm starting to work with here went from a 24-inch stick to a 2-dimensional triangle, an equilateral triangle, 24 inches all the way around, to an equilateral prism, 24 inches on all sides, or on all edges. And this, once I kind of get this last joint assembled, will be a really rigid building block. Now, it could exist as a shelter in and of itself. Prism structures have a lot of physical and sort of pragmatic, practical qualities to them that make great shelters, but they also have a lot of emotional and social and sort of historical connections that might make the concept of shelter really come alive. But if you start to think of this the way an architect or a designer might think, the question is, how do I make use of maybe multiple versions of a form like this to assemble larger and larger forms, possibly forms that could come together and come apart? I'm going to get this last thing put together, give you a sense of how I might clean up some of the joints, and then I'm really excited to see what's in your sketchbooks, the sort of initial concepting of this project, and how you will come together as a group in the studio. So by cleaning up this structure, I have something that, one, gives me sort of a tangible object to work with in the studio to help me think through these problems. It's given me a really great exercise in thinking about how these paper sticks can go from being fairly weak structures to fairly rigid and strong mechanical devices. And it gives me sort of something to play with in the studio as we talk about these really complicated social issues. I'm really excited to get you guys in the studio to start thinking through some of the kind of material and fabrication challenges, as well as some of the kind of social and emotional structures that we'll have to encounter to make this project come alive. This project really is your project. Take what I've given you so far as a beginning, and let's run with it as a group, guys. See you in the studio.